Nothing destroys a life faster than the excuses you repeat to yourself. Not failure, not bad luck, not other people. Excuses feel harmless, but they quietly steal your time, your discipline, and your future. They sound reasonable, they sound comforting, and that's why they're so dangerous. Every excuse protects you from discomfort and robs you of growth. I'll start tomorrow. I'm not ready yet. This isn't the right time. Each one keeps you safe today while silently costing you everything you could become. This audiobook is about exposing the enemy you keep defending, about seeing how excuses disguise themselves as logic, patience, and self-care while slowly destroying your momentum. Because the moment you stop believing your excuses, you stop killing your potential. Chapter 1. The Silent Damage of Excuses. Excuses rarely announce themselves as danger. They arrive quietly, dressed as reason, patience, and self-protection. You don't feel like you are sabotaging your life when you make an excuse. You feel sensible, you feel cautious, you feel justified. And that is why excuses are so destructive. They do not shock you into awareness the way failure does. They slowly lull you into delay while convincing you that nothing is wrong. The silent damage begins when excuses become explanations you accept without challenge. Over time, your standards lower, your urgency fades, and your tolerance for inaction grows. You don't lose your future in one dramatic decision. You lose it through small permissions granted to weakness. Each excuse feels insignificant, but together they form a pattern of avoidance that reshapes your identity. The most dangerous part is that while everything feels stable on the surface, your potential is quietly being eroded underneath. Excuses train your mind to associate comfort with safety and effort with danger. Each time you avoid discomfort by justifying inaction, your brain learns that escape is the correct response. This conditioning is subtle but powerful. Eventually, the thought of effort alone creates resistance, not because the task is impossible, but because your mind has been trained to retreat. Excuses do not just delay action, they rewire perception. They make growth feel risky and stagnation feel wise. This shift is catastrophic over time. You stop seeing opportunities as invitations and start seeing them as threats. And because excuses feel logical, you never question the damage they cause. You simply adjust your expectations downward and call it maturity. In reality, it is slow self-betrayal. The silent damage of excuses shows up most clearly in lost momentum. Momentum is fragile. It requires consistency and courage to build, but only one excuse to break. When momentum dies, restarting feels overwhelming. What once felt doable now feels heavy. This is why excuses compound. One excuse makes the next easier. Delay becomes habit. Habit becomes identity. You begin seeing yourself as someone who will act rather than someone who does. This identity quietly shapes every decision that follows. You stop trusting yourself. Self-doubt increases, confidence weakens, and all of this happens without a single visible failure. The damage is internal before it is external. Excuses also poison time, not because they waste it openly, but because they disguise wasted time as preparation. You tell yourself you are thinking, planning, or waiting for clarity. But clarity rarely arrives through waiting. It arrives through action. When excuses take over, time passes without friction. Days blur, weeks disappear. And because nothing dramatic goes wrong, you assume everything is fine. One day, you look back and realize that years were spent in the same mental position. The pain of that realization is immense, because you cannot point to one mistake. You can only point to countless moments where you chose comfort instead of courage. Another form of silent damage is emotional dullness. Excuses numb dissatisfaction. They soften the discomfort that would otherwise push you to change. Instead of feeling the urgency to act, you feel calm justification. This calm is dangerous. It keeps you asleep while your life demands awakening. Excuses act like anesthesia. They remove the pain that signals growth is necessary. Without that signal, you remain still, and stillness, when prolonged, becomes decay. This is why people can remain unhappy for years without changing anything. Excuses keep the pain just low enough to tolerate, but never low enough to disappear. Excuses also distort responsibility. They shift focus away from choice and toward circumstance. You begin attributing your position in life to timing, luck, or other people. This removes your sense of agency. Without agency, effort feels pointless. Why try if the outcome feels predetermined? This belief is corrosive. It turns capable people into passive observers of their own lives. And the longer this belief persists, the harder it becomes to reverse. Responsibility is the doorway to power. Excuses quietly lock that door while convincing you it was never meant to be opened. The silent damage becomes visible in your self-talk. You begin defending your inaction instead of challenging it. You explain your delays to yourself until they feel justified. Over time, honesty fades. You no longer ask whether you should act, only whether you can justify not acting. This internal dialogue erodes integrity. You lose alignment between who you are and who you know you should be. That misalignment creates tension, anxiety, and dissatisfaction that you can't quite explain. You feel restless but stuck, tired but unfulfilled. This is the emotional cost of excuses. Excuses also weaken resilience. When you avoid difficulty repeatedly, your tolerance for discomfort shrinks. Small challenges feel overwhelming. Minor setbacks feel catastrophic. Life hasn't become harder, you have become less trained to face it. This is one of the most dangerous outcomes of excuses. They don't just delay progress, they make future progress harder. The strength you fail to build today becomes the weakness you struggle with tomorrow. What makes excuses truly lethal is that they feel protective. They promise relief, safety, and understanding. But what they protect you from is exactly what would have made you stronger. Growth demands friction. Strength requires resistance. Excuses remove both, and in doing so, they quietly dismantle the very qualities you will need later in life. The silent damage of excuses is not obvious at first, but if left unchallenged, it becomes total, and by the time it reveals itself, the cost is not measured in effort, it is measured in lost years. Chapter 2. Why excuses feel safe but keep you weak. Excuses feel safe because they protect you from discomfort in the present moment. They wrap fear in logic and hesitation in reason, allowing you to avoid action without feeling irresponsible. When you make an excuse, your nervous system relaxes. Pressure fades, anxiety lowers, and that immediate relief tricks your mind into believing you made the right choice. This is why excuses are addictive. They deliver comfort instantly while hiding the long-term cost. You don't feel weak when you make an excuse, you feel reasonable. But weakness is not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it is quiet, calm, and well explained. Over time, this false sense of safety becomes your default response to challenge. You stop leaning into growth and start leaning away from it. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin training yourself to retreat rather than rise. Excuses feel safe because they remove responsibility. Responsibility carries weight. It demands effort, accountability, and risk. Excuses lift that weight off your shoulders temporarily. They tell you it's not your fault, not your time, not your moment. This emotional relief feels like protection, but it is actually surrender. Each time you excuse yourself from action, you hand your power over to circumstance. Power unused becomes power lost. The more often you avoid responsibility, the less capable you feel of carrying it. Eventually, even small responsibilities feel overwhelming. This is how excuses weaken you, not by exhausting you, but by preventing you from ever building strength. Excuses also feel safe because they preserve your self-image. Acting carries the risk of failure, and failure threatens the ego. By not trying, you never have to confront the possibility that you might fall short. Excuses protect you from this discomfort. They allow you to believe you could succeed if you really tried, without ever proving it. But this protection comes at a cost. You remain trapped in potential instead of progress. Your identity becomes fragile because it is untested. True strength comes from knowing you can fail and still continue. Excuses deny you that strength by keeping you hidden from reality. Another reason excuses feel safe is that they keep expectations low. When you excuse yourself often, you stop expecting greatness from yourself. And low expectations reduce pressure, but they also reduce growth. When nothing is expected, nothing is demanded. Life becomes easier, but smaller. You stop pushing boundaries. You stop discovering new capacities. You become comfortable being capable of more but delivering less. This gap between potential and action is where weakness grows. Not physical weakness, but internal weakness. The quiet belief that effort is optional. Excuses weaken you by shrinking your tolerance for discomfort. Strength is built by facing resistance repeatedly. Excuses remove resistance. Each time you choose comfort over effort, your threshold lowers. Tasks that once felt manageable begin to feel heavy. Challenges that once excited you now intimidate you. Life hasn't changed, your capacity has. Weakness is not the presence of difficulty. It is the absence of exposure to difficulty. Excuses ensure that absence. Excuses also distort time. They convince you there will always be later, later to try, later to change, later to commit. This illusion removes urgency. Without urgency, effort fades. Without effort, progress stalls. Years pass inside this illusion of later until later becomes never. This is one of the most damaging effects of excuses. They steal time without stealing peace. You feel calm while losing years. When excuses become habitual, they begin shaping identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who pushes through and start seeing yourself as someone who waits. Waiting becomes normal. Delay becomes justified. And this identity reinforces weakness, not because you are incapable, but because you have trained yourself to hesitate. Strength requires friction. It requires risk. It requires responsibility. Excuses remove all three while pretending to protect you. They feel safe because they avoid pain, but pain is not the enemy. Avoidance is. Weakness does not come from trying and failing. It comes from never trying at all. And as long as excuses feel safe, strength will remain out of reach. Chapter 3. How you learn to lie to yourself. Lying to yourself is not something you wake up one day and decide to do. It is something you learn slowly, quietly, and almost unconsciously. It begins the moment you choose comfort over truth and justify it instead of questioning it. The first lie is usually small. I'll do it later. Today was just a bad day. I needed rest. These statements sound harmless, even responsible, but repetition turns them into beliefs. Over time, the mind stops distinguishing between honesty and convenience. What matters is not whether something is true, but whether it feels relieving. This is how self-deception is born. You are not trying to be dishonest, you are trying to feel safe. And safety becomes more important than truth. That shift changes everything about how you live, decide, and grow. The mind learns to lie as a defense mechanism. Truth demands action, lies demand nothing. When the truth threatens your comfort, your mind steps in to protect you. It reframes inaction as wisdom. It reframes fear as patience. It reframes avoidance as self-care. These reframes are subtle, and that is why they work. You don't feel like you're lying. You feel like you're being reasonable. But reason without courage becomes manipulation, and the person being manipulated is you. Over time, this internal distortion becomes automatic. You no longer notice when you're bending reality to protect your habits. Self-deception strengthens when lies go unchallenged. Each time you accept an excuse without questioning it, you reinforce the behavior behind it. The brain learns that lying works. It reduces discomfort. It avoids responsibility. It keeps life predictable. Predictability feels safe, even when it's destroying you. This is how people remain stuck for years while believing they are working on themselves. The lie is not loud. It is polite. It speaks calmly, and that calmness convinces you that nothing urgent needs to change. Lying to yourself also preserves identity. The truth might require you to admit that you are not who you thought you were, that you are inconsistent, that you avoid discomfort, that you delay your potential. These admissions are painful, so the mind chooses a softer narrative, a narrative where circumstances are the problem, timing is the issue, and effort can wait. This narrative protects your self-image, but it slowly destroys your integrity. You stop aligning your words with your actions, and that misalignment creates inner tension you can't quite explain. Over time, self-deception reshapes your memory. You forget how many times you promised yourself you would change. You forget how often you delayed. You remember only the reasons, not the pattern. This selective memory allows the lie to survive. You see each excuse as isolated instead of connected, and because you never see the full picture, you never confront the truth. Awareness is dangerous to lies. That is why self-deception avoids reflection. Lying to yourself also weakens accountability. When every failure has a justification, nothing is learned. Growth requires ownership. Lies redirect ownership away from choice and towards circumstance. This keeps you passive, and passivity feels safe because it removes pressure, but it also removes power. Without power, life becomes something that happens to you instead of something you shape. The most dangerous lies are the ones that sound wise. I'm being patient. I'm protecting my peace. I'm waiting for clarity. These phrases are not wrong, they are misused. Wisdom without action becomes avoidance. Peace without growth becomes stagnation. Clarity without movement becomes illusion. These lies are sophisticated, which makes them hard to detect. But their outcome is always the same: no change. Eventually, the cost of lying shows up as dissatisfaction. You feel restless, unfulfilled, and disconnected from yourself. You can't explain why, because on the surface, everything seems justified. But deep down, you know something is wrong. That feeling is truth trying to break through. The moment you stop lying to yourself is uncomfortable, but it is also liberating, because truth demands action, and action restores power. And power is what self-deception steals the longest. Chapter 4. Comfort is the mask of self-destruction. Comfort rarely announces itself as danger. It arrives softly, promising relief, balance, and peace. It tells you that you've done enough for today, that rest is deserved, that pushing can wait. And in moderation, comfort is necessary. But when comfort becomes a lifestyle instead of a pause, it turns into something far more destructive. The most dangerous thing about comfort is that it feels like care. It feels like kindness toward yourself, yet behind that feeling is a slow erosion of discipline, urgency, and ambition. Comfort removes friction, and friction is where growth is forged. Without resistance, muscles weaken. Without challenge, the mind dulls. Comfort keeps you safe from discomfort, but it also keeps you far from becoming who you are capable of being. And because nothing dramatic goes wrong, you don't notice the damage until years have already passed. Comfort is seductive because it offers certainty in an uncertain world. When life feels overwhelming, comfort gives you something familiar to hold on to. The familiar feels safe, even when it's limiting. You return to routines that no longer challenge you, habits that no longer build you, and environments that no longer inspire you. Over time, familiarity replaces progress. You stop asking whether something is good for you and start asking whether it feels easy. This shift is subtle but fatal. Life begins shrinking around your comfort zone. Your world gets smaller. Your courage weakens, and you mistake this shrinking for stability. In reality, you are slowly cutting yourself off from the experiences that would have made you stronger, wiser, and more fulfilled. Self-destruction through comfort is quiet. There is no crisis, no breakdown, no obvious failure, just a steady decline in standards. You tolerate what once bothered you. You delay what once mattered. You accept less effort from yourself and call it balance. This is how comfort destroys ambition without ever attacking it directly. It convinces you that wanting more is unnecessary, even selfish. That striving is stressful. That settling is maturity. And by the time you realize you've settled, your hunger for more has already faded. Comfort also numbs dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction is painful, but it is also informative. It tells you something needs to change. Comfort dulls that signal. It soothes the discomfort without addressing its cause. You feel calmer, but nothing improves. This calm becomes dangerous because it removes urgency. Without urgency, effort disappears. And without effort, life stagnates. You remain comfortable, but deeply unfulfilled. This is the quiet suffering many people live with, not unhappy enough to change, not fulfilled enough to feel alive. Comfort trains avoidance. Each time you choose ease over effort, your brain learns that avoidance is the correct response to challenge. Over time, even small challenges feel exhausting. Your tolerance for difficulty drops. Life hasn't become harder, you've become less trained. This is one of the cruelest outcomes of comfort. It makes future growth feel overwhelming. The very thing that once built you now intimidates you. Comfort also distorts identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who pushes through and start seeing yourself as someone who protects their comfort. This identity shapes every decision that follows. You don't ask what will build you, you ask what will feel easiest, and life responds accordingly, offering fewer opportunities, fewer challenges, and fewer reasons to grow. The tragedy of comfort is that it feels earned. You tell yourself you deserve it, and you do after effort. But when comfort replaces effort instead of rewarding it, it becomes theft. It steals your future in exchange for temporary relief. It takes everything that could have been built and trades it for momentary peace. Comfort is not evil, but unearned comfort is. It robs you quietly, patiently, and politely. It never forces you to stop. It simply invites you to rest forever. And that is how self-destruction wears a smile. If you do not challenge comfort, it will eventually erase the person you were meant to become. Chapter 5. Tomorrow is the most dangerous word. Tomorrow is the most dangerous word in the human vocabulary because it sounds harmless while stealing everything that matters. It feels hopeful, patient, and responsible. It tells you that you are not quitting, just delaying. But delay is how ambition quietly dies. Tomorrow gives your mind permission to avoid discomfort today, while pretending commitment still exists. You don't feel like you're giving up. You feel like you're planning. And that illusion is what makes tomorrow so lethal. Every time you say tomorrow, you push responsibility forward and protect yourself from the effort required now. Over time, this habit trains your mind to associate intention with delay instead of action. You become someone who means well but never moves. Life doesn't punish you immediately for this. It simply moves on without you while you wait for a day that never arrives. Tomorrow becomes dangerous because it removes urgency. Urgency is the force that turns desire into action. Without it, goals remain ideas and dreams remain fantasies. Tomorrow makes everything feel less important today. The task can wait, the discipline can wait, the conversation can wait. And because nothing collapses instantly, you assume the delay is harmless. But urgency fades quickly when repeatedly ignored. You stop feeling the pressure to act. You stop feeling the weight of time. And once urgency is gone, effort soon follows. Life rewards urgency because urgency creates movement. Tomorrow replaces movement with imagination, and imagination without action becomes a comfortable prison. The mind loves tomorrow because it avoids risk. Acting today exposes you to failure, rejection, and uncertainty. Waiting until tomorrow protects you from all of that. You get to keep your self-image intact without testing it. But this protection comes at a cost. Confidence cannot grow without exposure. Strength cannot develop without resistance. Tomorrow shields you from discomfort, but it also shields you from growth. Over time, the very things you avoid today become the reasons you feel stuck later. Tomorrow doesn't make life easier. It makes the future heavier. Tomorrow also distorts time. It makes you believe you have more of it than you do. Days feel abundant, weeks feel endless, but time does not respond to intention, it responds to use. Every tomorrow you rely on is a today that slips away unused. And when you finally look back, you don't remember the tomorrows you planned. You remember the days you wasted. Regret is not born from failure. It is born from delay. The most dangerous thing about tomorrow is that it feels responsible. You tell yourself you'll do it when you're ready, when conditions improve, when you have more energy. But readiness is built through action, not waiting. Conditions improve when you move, not when you pause. Energy is created by momentum, not comfort. Tomorrow keeps you waiting for things that can only be created today. Tomorrow also weakens discipline. Discipline thrives on immediacy. It requires you to act when you don't feel like it. When you postpone action, you reinforce the habit of negotiation. You teach your mind that effort is optional. Over time, discipline erodes. What once required courage now requires force. And eventually, even force fails. People don't fail because they choose the wrong path. They fail because they keep postponing the right one. Tomorrow becomes a hiding place for fear disguised as patience. And the longer you hide there, the harder it becomes to leave. The truth is brutal but freeing. Tomorrow does not exist. There is only now. There is only this moment asking something of you. And every time you refuse it, it passes to someone else. If you want a different life, it cannot begin tomorrow. It must begin now, because tomorrow has already taken enough from you. Chapter 6. Excuses versus responsibility, the turning point. There is a moment in every person's life where excuses and responsibility stand face to face, and only one can survive. Until that moment, excuses feel protective, and responsibility feels heavy. Excuses soften reality, while responsibility demands you confront it. This is the turning point most people avoid because it requires brutal honesty. Responsibility removes all hiding places. It forces you to admit that your life is not happening to you, it is being shaped by you. This realization is uncomfortable, but it is also powerful. The moment you choose responsibility over excuses, you reclaim authorship of your life. You stop being a victim of circumstance and become a participant in your own future. Nothing changes instantly on the outside, but everything shifts internally. That internal shift is the beginning of real transformation. Excuses survive on emotional comfort. Responsibility survives on truth. When you choose excuses, you protect your feelings in the short term, but damage your future. When you choose responsibility, you accept discomfort now to prevent regret later. This is why responsibility feels so difficult at first. It removes the illusion that someone else will fix things for you. It demands action where excuses demanded patience. It demands courage where excuses demanded understanding. But inside that demand is freedom. Responsibility gives you back your power, because power only exists where choice is acknowledged. The turning point begins when you stop asking why this happened to me and start asking what am I going to do about it. That single shift separates those who change from those who stay stuck. Responsibility does not mean blaming yourself for everything. It means owning what you can control: your habits, your effort, your reactions, your discipline. When you own these, excuses lose their grip. They can no longer survive in an environment of accountability. Excuses speak in stories. Responsibility speaks in actions. Excuses explain. Responsibility executes. At the turning point, you realize explanations have never built anything meaningful in your life. Action has. You stop trying to sound reasonable and start trying to be effective. This is where growth accelerates. You stop justifying delay and start demanding progress from yourself. Not harshly, but honestly. The mind resists responsibility because responsibility removes emotional padding. You can no longer soften failure with stories. You must confront it directly. But this confrontation strengthens you. Each time you take responsibility, your confidence grows. You begin trusting yourself again. Self-trust is the foundation of discipline, resilience, and consistency. Excuses destroy self-trust. Responsibility rebuilds it. Responsibility also changes how you experience pain. Pain no longer feels like punishment. It becomes information. It shows you where growth is needed. Instead of escaping discomfort, you analyze it. Instead of numbing frustration, you use it. This shift transforms struggle into progress. Excuses avoid pain. Responsibility converts it. At the turning point, you realize no one is coming to save you. This realization is terrifying at first, but liberating once accepted. You stop waiting for motivation, clarity, or permission. You start moving because movement is required. Responsibility makes you self-reliant, and self-reliance is one of the strongest positions a human being can occupy. Excuses also die when responsibility enters, because responsibility raises standards. You no longer accept partial effort. You stop tolerating self-betrayal. You demand alignment between what you say and what you do. This alignment creates inner peace. Excuses create inner conflict. Responsibility resolves it. The turning point is not loud. There is no announcement, no dramatic moment. It is a quiet decision made repeatedly. A decision to stop lying, to stop waiting, to stop protecting weakness. Each time you choose responsibility, the old identity weakens and the new one strengthens. Responsibility also clarifies priorities. You stop doing what feels good and start doing what builds you. Time becomes valuable. Energy becomes protected. Focus sharpens. Life becomes intentional instead of reactive. This clarity is a direct result of accountability. As responsibility becomes your default, excuses begin to feel uncomfortable. They no longer bring relief. They bring guilt. This is progress. It means your conscience has awakened. You are no longer asleep inside your own life. The turning point changes how life responds to you. Life respects responsibility because responsibility signals readiness. You begin receiving challenges that refine rather than crush you, opportunities that require discipline rather than luck. Eventually, excuses no longer feel safe. Responsibility feels safe. Because safety is no longer comfort, it is control. That is the turning point. And once you cross it, there is no going back to the old version of you without feeling the cost. Chapter 7. How discipline exposes every excuse. Discipline has a unique way of revealing truth because it removes all room for negotiation. When discipline enters your life, excuses immediately become uncomfortable. They no longer sound reasonable. They sound exposed. Discipline forces clarity. It strips away stories and leaves only action or inaction. You can no longer hide behind explanations because discipline asks one simple question every day. Did you do what needed to be done, or did you not? This directness is why excuses fear discipline. Excuses survive in ambiguity. Discipline thrives in structure. The moment structure is introduced, excuses lose their power to blend in. They stand out as avoidance rather than logic. This exposure is painful at first because it confronts you with how often you've been protecting comfort instead of building strength. But that pain is productive. It wakes you up to the truth of your patterns. Discipline exposes excuses by removing emotional dependency. Excuses rely on mood. They need tiredness, lack of motivation, or uncertainty to survive. Discipline operates independently of how you feel. When you act regardless of emotion, excuses lose their foundation. You begin to see that most of your reasons for not acting were never obstacles, they were preferences. Discipline does not argue with preference. It simply moves. And when you move consistently, the gap between excuse and action becomes obvious. You realize that progress was never blocked by circumstance, only delayed by choice. This realization is uncomfortable, but it is also empowering. Excuses often disguise themselves as intelligence. They sound thoughtful, measured, and cautious. Discipline exposes this disguise by producing results. When disciplined action leads to growth, confidence, and momentum, the excuse loses credibility. You see that overthinking was never wisdom, waiting was never patience, avoidance was never strategy. Discipline doesn't debate, it demonstrates, and demonstration destroys illusion faster than argument ever could. Discipline also exposes excuses by creating accountability. When you commit to a routine, a standard, or a schedule, excuses have nowhere to hide. Missed actions become visible, patterns become clear. You stop seeing your behavior as isolated incidents and start seeing it as a system. This awareness is powerful. It removes denial. You can no longer claim you usually try when the evidence shows inconsistency. Discipline turns self-deception into self-awareness. Another way discipline exposes excuses is through repetition. Excuses rely on novelty. They work best when situations feel unique. Discipline repeats the same commitment daily. This repetition reveals how often excuses recycle themselves. You notice the same reasons appearing again and again, and once you see that pattern, you can no longer believe the excuse is situational. It is habitual. That realization changes everything. Discipline exposes the cost of excuses by replacing them with progress. When you experience what consistent effort creates, excuses begin to feel expensive. You see how much time was lost, how much energy was wasted, how much confidence was delayed. This contrast makes excuses intolerable. You no longer need to fight them, you outgrow them. Discipline also exposes excuses by strengthening self-trust. Each time you follow through, your trust in yourself increases. Excuses depend on self-doubt. They need you to believe you can't handle discomfort. Discipline proves otherwise. And once you know you can endure effort, excuses lose their emotional appeal. Excuses thrive in chaos. Discipline creates order. Order removes confusion. When your day has structure, decisions become simpler. You no longer ask if you feel like acting. You act because it is scheduled, expected, and aligned. Excuses collapse under predictability. Discipline also exposes excuses by demanding honesty. You stop asking why you didn't act and start asking why you chose not to. That question shifts responsibility completely. It removes victimhood. It removes denial. And it restores power. As discipline strengthens, excuses begin to feel insulting. They no longer protect you. They offend your standards. You become someone who respects effort, someone who values consistency, someone who no longer negotiates with weakness. Discipline exposes excuses not to shame you, but to free you. Freedom comes from clarity. Clarity comes from action. Once excuses are exposed, they cannot survive in the same environment as discipline. They wither, and what remains is a person capable of building a life without hiding from themselves. Chapter 8. Fear disguised as logic. Fear rarely announces itself honestly. If it did, most people would confront it. Instead, fear learns to dress itself in logic, reason, and careful thinking. It speaks calmly. It sounds intelligent. It tells you that you're being smart by waiting, cautious by hesitating, responsible by delaying. And because it does not feel emotional or dramatic, you trust it. This is how fear survives undetected. It convinces you that inaction is wisdom and that movement is reckless. You don't feel afraid, you feel sensible. But beneath that surface, calm is the same old fear of failure, judgment, discomfort, and uncertainty. Fear disguised as logic is dangerous because it does not trigger alarm. It settles in quietly and slowly rewrites your decisions while convincing you that you're thinking clearly. Logic is meant to guide action, not replace it. When logic becomes a tool for avoiding movement, it has been hijacked by fear. You analyze instead of acting. You plan instead of beginning. You research instead of committing. None of these things are wrong on their own, but fear uses them as delays. It keeps you busy enough to feel productive while ensuring you never take the risk that would change your life. Over time, this creates a false identity. The thinker who never moves, the planner who never builds, the careful person who never grows. And because society often praises caution, your fear receives validation instead of challenge. Fear disguised as logic also manipulates timing. It tells you now is not ideal, that conditions are not right, that you need more preparation. It creates a fantasy future where everything will be safer and clearer. But that future never arrives. Conditions never become perfect. Clarity never arrives without action. What fear is really saying is not wait for the right time, but avoid discomfort indefinitely. And each time you obey, fear strengthens its authority over your decisions. One of the most convincing tricks fear uses is exaggeration. It magnifies potential consequences while minimizing potential growth. It highlights everything that could go wrong and ignores everything that could go right. It frames risk as danger and discomfort as harm. This distorted logic feels protective, but it keeps you small. Growth always involves uncertainty. Strength is built by stepping into what you cannot fully control. Fear pretends to protect you from loss, while quietly guaranteeing stagnation. Fear, disguised as logic, also loves complexity. Simple actions threaten fear because they lead to movement. So fear complicates things. It tells you the situation is nuanced, the problem is layered, the solution is unclear. Complexity becomes paralysis. You feel intelligent but ineffective. The truth is that most life-changing actions are simple but not easy. Fear adds layers to delay commitment. Another way fear hides is through comparison. It tells you others are more prepared, more talented, more qualified. It frames hesitation as humility. But humility does not mean refusing to try. Fear uses comparison to convince you that stepping forward would be inappropriate or premature. In reality, growth is never granted through permission. It is claimed through effort. Fear, disguised as logic, also reframes discomfort as damage. It tells you stress is harmful, struggle is unhealthy, pressure is dangerous. While extremes are harmful, discomfort is necessary. Discomfort signals growth. Fear twists this truth and convinces you that avoiding challenge is self-care. Over time, this creates fragility. You become someone who cannot tolerate difficulty because fear convinced you that difficulty was wrong. Fear also disguises itself as realism. It tells you to be practical, to lower expectations, to avoid disappointment. But realism without courage becomes surrender. Life does not reward those who only choose what feels safe. It rewards those who prepare themselves to handle what is difficult. Fear calls this recklessness. Growth calls it courage. One of the clearest signs of fear, disguised as logic, is endless reconsideration. You decide, then rethink. You commit, then hesitate. You start, then stop. Fear cannot allow consistency because consistency leads to momentum. Momentum threatens fear's control. So, it keeps you oscillating between action and retreat until exhaustion sets in. Fear also uses past experiences as evidence. It reminds you of previous failures, embarrassments, and mistakes. It presents them as proof that caution is necessary. But past failure is not a warning, it is training. Fear misuses memory to block progress instead of informing it. When fear disguises itself as logic, it steals confidence quietly. You begin doubting your instincts. You rely more on analysis than intuition. You stop trusting your ability to adapt. This dependence weakens you over time. Confidence grows through experience, not protection. The antidote to fear, disguised as logic, is action. Action exposes exaggeration. Action collapses imagined danger into real experience. And real experience is rarely as catastrophic as fear predicts. Once you act, fear loses credibility. Fear cannot survive repeated proof that you can handle discomfort. Each step taken weakens its disguise. Each decision made strengthens your authority over your life. Logic is a tool. Fear is a hijacker. When you separate the two, clarity returns. And when clarity returns, excuses lose their final hiding place. Chapter 9. Breaking the habit of avoidance. Avoidance does not begin as a conscious decision to fail. It begins as a small escape from discomfort, a task delayed, a conversation postponed, a responsibility ignored for just one more day. These moments feel harmless, even necessary, but repetition turns escape into habit, and habit turns avoidance into identity. You stop seeing avoidance as something you do and start seeing it as who you are. This is where real damage occurs. Life begins organizing itself around your avoidance. Opportunities shrink, confidence weakens, pressure builds silently. Breaking this habit requires you to see avoidance not as rest, but as resistance to growth. Until you recognize avoidance for what it truly is, you will keep mistaking it for self-protection. Avoidance trains the mind to associate discomfort with danger. Each time you step away from challenge, your brain learns that retreat is the correct response. Over time, even small demands feel overwhelming. Tasks that once required effort now require courage. Life hasn't become harder, you have become less practiced at facing it. This is why avoidance compounds. The longer you avoid, the more powerful avoidance becomes. Breaking this cycle requires exposure. You must face what you've been running from, not all at once, but consistently. Each act of confrontation weakens the habit. Avoidance thrives in emotional reasoning. You wait until you feel ready, confident, or calm. But feelings are unreliable. They fluctuate. Avoidance uses this fluctuation to delay action indefinitely. Breaking the habit means acting without emotional permission. You move despite discomfort. This retrains your nervous system. It learns that discomfort is survivable. Once that lesson is learned, avoidance loses its authority. Avoidance also hides behind productivity. You stay busy, but not effective. You do tasks that feel safe instead of tasks that matter. This creates the illusion of progress without real movement. Breaking avoidance requires brutal honesty about where your effort is going. Not all work builds. Some work distracts. You must learn to distinguish between motion and progress. One reason avoidance persists is fear of outcome. Success carries responsibility. Failure carries discomfort. Avoidance avoids both. But avoiding outcome also avoids growth. Breaking avoidance means accepting uncertainty. You stop trying to control outcomes and start committing to effort. Effort is always within your control. This shift restores power. Avoidance weakens self-trust. Each time you delay, you send your mind a message that you cannot be relied upon. Over time, confidence erodes. Breaking avoidance rebuilds trust. Each completed action repairs the relationship with yourself. Trust compounds quickly when consistency appears. Avoidance also distorts time. You believe you have more time than you do. This illusion removes urgency. Breaking avoidance requires confronting reality. Time is not waiting. Life is happening now. Awareness of time sharpens action. Breaking avoidance does not require intensity. It requires consistency. Small actions done daily dismantle avoidance more effectively than occasional bursts of effort. The habit weakens as the new pattern strengthens. Avoidance thrives in isolation. When no one sees your patterns, they persist. Structure and accountability expose avoidance. Visibility creates responsibility. Responsibility drives action. Avoidance also feeds on perfectionism. You wait for the right moment, the right plan, the right version of yourself. Breaking avoidance means accepting imperfect action. Progress comes from movement, not perfection. As avoidance weakens, resistance appears. This is a sign of progress. Resistance is the habit fighting extinction. Push through it gently but firmly. Eventually, what you once avoided becomes manageable, then familiar, then routine. This is how habits die. Breaking avoidance changes how you experience life. Challenges no longer terrify you, they invite you. The habit loses its grip when action becomes your default. And once avoidance is broken, momentum takes its place. Breaking avoidance also means confronting the stories you tell yourself about who you are. Avoidance survives by shaping identity. You start believing you are someone who works best under pressure, someone who needs the right mood, someone who performs later rather than now. These stories feel personal, but they are learned defenses. They protect avoidance by giving it a personality. When you challenge avoidance through action, these stories begin to collapse. You discover that you can act without pressure, without perfect conditions, without emotional alignment. This realization is destabilizing at first because it removes familiar excuses, but it is also freeing. You are no longer bound by a fragile self-image built around delay. You begin redefining yourself as someone who moves forward regardless of internal resistance. Avoidance also feeds on overstimulation. Constant noise, content, and distraction give your mind endless escape routes. When discomfort appears, you reach for something to numb it. Breaking avoidance requires reducing these escapes, not eliminating pleasure, but removing constant anesthesia. Silence becomes important. Boredom becomes useful. In those quiet spaces, you feel the discomfort you've been avoiding. That feeling is not your enemy. It is the signal that something needs your attention. When you stop running from it, it loses its intensity and reveals direction. Another layer of avoidance is decision avoidance. You keep options open to avoid commitment. You delay choosing because choice closes doors. But life moves forward whether you choose or not. Avoiding decisions is still a decision, one that hands control to circumstances. Breaking this habit means choosing direction even when certainty is absent. Decisiveness builds momentum. Momentum dissolves avoidance. You don't need perfect decisions. You need committed ones. Avoidance weakens your relationship with effort. You start seeing effort as something to minimize instead of something to respect. Breaking avoidance means redefining effort as investment rather than cost. Each effort made builds capacity. Each avoided effort shrinks it. Once you feel this contrast, avoidance becomes less attractive. You begin craving progress more than comfort. Avoidance also thrives on emotional storytelling. You feel tired, overwhelmed, unmotivated, so you delay. But emotions are temporary states, not instructions. Breaking avoidance requires separating feeling from action. You allow emotions to exist without obeying them. This skill is transformative. It gives you control without suppression. You move while tired. You act while uncertain, and each time you do, avoidance loses leverage. Breaking avoidance also exposes how much energy you regain through action. Avoidance feels like rest, but it drains you mentally. Action, even difficult action, often energizes you. This reversal surprises many people. You realize you weren't exhausted from doing too much. You were exhausted from avoiding what mattered. This insight alone can dismantle years of hesitation. Avoidance distorts self-worth. You begin judging yourself for not doing what you know you should. Shame builds. Shame fuels more avoidance. Breaking the habit interrupts this loop. Action restores dignity. You stop apologizing to yourself through excuses and start respecting yourself through effort. Self-respect grows quickly once avoidance weakens. Avoidance also prevents learning. When you avoid challenges, you avoid feedback. Without feedback, growth stalls. Breaking avoidance invites mistakes, and mistakes teach faster than success. You stop fearing error and start using it. Learning accelerates. Confidence stabilizes. Another hidden cost of avoidance is missed alignment. When you avoid action, life cannot meet you. Opportunities require movement. Breaking avoidance makes you visible to life again. Doors open because you are walking toward them, not because you deserve them. Avoidance feels protective because it delays confrontation. But confrontation is where clarity lives. Breaking avoidance brings clarity. You see what matters. you see what doesn't. Confusion fades when action begins. Breaking avoidance also sharpens patience. You stop rushing comfort and start trusting process. You understand that progress compounds quietly. This patience is active, not passive. It is patience rooted in effort. As avoidance dissolves, discipline replaces it naturally. You don't force discipline, you inherit it through consistency. Discipline becomes who you are, not something you try to be. Eventually, avoidance feels foreign. You recognize it immediately, and when it appears, you move anyway. This is how the habit finally breaks, not through force, but through repeated courage, and once broken, it does not return easily. Chapter 10. Choosing pain now or regret later. Every meaningful life is shaped by a single, unavoidable choice: pain now or regret later. Pain now is effort, discipline, discomfort, and resistance. Regret later is the quiet ache of knowing you could have done more but chose not to. Pain now demands energy. Regret later drains it forever. Most people avoid pain now because it feels immediate and demanding, while regret feels distant and abstract. But time has a way of making regret louder and heavier. Pain now is temporary. It passes once the action is done. Regret later settles in and stays. It shows up in moments of silence, reflection, and comparison. It asks questions you can't answer honestly. Choosing pain now is not about seeking suffering. It is about respecting your future self enough to carry discomfort today. Pain now feels intimidating because it confronts you with your limits. It asks you to stretch, struggle, and risk failure. Regret later feels easier because it allows you to remain comfortable today. But comfort is deceptive. It feels like relief while quietly creating loss. Pain now builds strength. Regret later exposes weakness. When you choose pain now, you grow capacity. When you choose regret later, your capacity shrinks. This is why people who consistently choose pain now often appear calm and confident later in life. They paid the price early. Those who avoided it pay with dissatisfaction later. Pain now is honest. It tells you exactly what is required. Regret later is vague and cruel. It never tells you what you should have done differently in time to fix it. Pain now sharpens focus. It forces you to be present. Regret later blurs everything with what if. When you embrace pain now, you take control of your narrative. You become an active participant in your life. When you choose regret later, life happens without your input, and you are left reacting to consequences instead of shaping outcomes. Most people confuse pain now with harm. They think discomfort is dangerous, but pain now is often the sign that something important is happening. Muscles grow through pain. Skills develop through frustration. Character forms through challenge. Regret later, on the other hand, produces no growth. It only produces reflection without resolution. You can learn from pain now. You can only mourn regret later. That difference alone makes the choice clear. Choosing pain now also builds trust with yourself. Each time you do what is difficult but necessary, you prove that you can be relied upon. This trust becomes confidence. Confidence reduces fear. Fear no longer controls your decisions. Regret later destroys trust. It reminds you of every promise you broke to yourself. That erosion of self-trust is devastating. It makes future action harder because you doubt your own follow-through. Pain now also clarifies priorities. When something hurts to pursue, you find out quickly whether it matters. Regret later leaves everything unresolved. You never know what was truly important because you never tested it. Pain now gives you answers. Regret later leaves you with questions. Answers create peace. Questions create unrest. Choosing pain now reshapes your relationship with time. You stop wasting it. You become intentional. You respect each day as an opportunity rather than a guarantee. Regret later is built on the illusion of endless time. When that illusion breaks, panic sets in. Pain now teaches urgency without panic. Regret later teaches panic without action. Pain now is also empowering because it is chosen. You decide to face difficulty. Regret later is imposed. It arrives whether you want it or not. One comes from courage. The other comes from avoidance. Courage strengthens identity. Avoidance weakens it. Those who choose pain now are not immune to fear. They simply refuse to let fear decide for them. They understand that fear fades with action, while regret grows with delay. This understanding becomes wisdom over time. Pain now also creates momentum. Each difficult action makes the next one easier. Regret later creates inertia. Each delay makes the next step heavier. Momentum builds lives. Inertia buries them. When you look at people you admire, you rarely see their pain now. You see their stability later. That stability was paid for through discomfort, sacrifice, and persistence. Regret later offers no such return. The choice is never between pain and no pain. It is always between pain now or pain later. One strengthens you, the other haunts you. Choosing pain now does not guarantee success, but it guarantees self-respect. Regret later guarantees neither success nor peace. In the end, pain now passes, regret later stays. And the life you build will always reflect which one you chose. Choosing pain now requires you to accept that growth will never feel convenient. There will never be a season where effort feels perfectly aligned with comfort. Pain now shows up when you are tired, uncertain, and tempted to delay. This is why it builds character. Character is not formed when life is gentle. It is formed when you choose effort without reassurance. Each time you choose pain now, you strengthen the muscle of self-command. You prove to yourself that discomfort does not control you. Regret later exists because that muscle was never trained. It grows when effort is avoided and responsibility is postponed. Over time, regret becomes a silent witness to every moment you chose ease instead of integrity. Pain now asks for courage. Regret later demands explanation, and explanations never satisfy the heart the way action does. Pain now also teaches you how to fail correctly. When you act despite discomfort, you sometimes fail. But failure through effort sharpens you. It gives you information, experience, and direction. Regret later offers none of that. It leaves you guessing who you could have been. Pain now allows adjustment. Regret later locks the door on possibility. When you choose pain now, failure becomes feedback. When you choose regret later, failure becomes identity. This is why pain now is productive and regret later is corrosive. One builds wisdom, the other builds bitterness. Choosing pain now reshapes how you see struggle. Struggle becomes temporary labor instead of permanent suffering. You understand that effort has an end. Regret does not. Regret lingers because it cannot be resolved through action once time has passed. Pain now ends when the work is done. Regret later resurfaces whenever you reflect. This difference changes how you approach difficulty. You stop fearing effort and start fearing stagnation. That shift alone can change the direction of your entire life. Pain now also protects your future self. Every difficult action you take today removes a burden from tomorrow. Discipline now reduces chaos later. Learning now reduces confusion later. Sacrifice now reduces regret later. Your future self is shaped by what you are willing to endure today. Regret later is what happens when the future inherits unresolved responsibility. Pain now is a gift you give forward, Regret later is a debt you leave unpaid. Choosing pain now also simplifies life. You stop negotiating with yourself endlessly. You know what must be done, and you do it. This clarity reduces mental exhaustion. Regret later complicates life. It fills your mind with alternatives, missed chances, and unanswered questions. Pain now creates closure. Regret later creates loops. Loops drain energy. Closure restores it. Pain now also builds inner authority. You stop waiting for external pressure to force you into action. You move because you decide to. This autonomy is powerful. Regret later is the result of outsourced control. When you let circumstances decide for you, you lose authorship of your life. Pain now keeps authorship where it belongs with you. Those who choose pain now develop a different relationship with fear. Fear becomes a signal rather than a command. It tells you something matters, not that you should retreat. Regret later is fear's reward. It is fear getting what it wanted, your inaction. Pain now denies fear its victory. Pain now also strengthens patience. You accept that progress takes time. You invest without immediate reward. Regret later is impatient by nature. It wants relief without effort and peace without work. That impatience always ends in dissatisfaction. Choosing pain now trains resilience. You learn how to recover, adapt, and continue. Regret later trains fragility. It keeps you stuck in what cannot be changed. Resilience moves forward. Fragility looks backward. Pain now also changes how you interpret success. Success becomes something earned, not something hoped for. This creates gratitude rather than entitlement. Regret later breeds resentment because life did not deliver what effort never pursued. Every day presents this choice quietly. It is not dramatic. It appears in small decisions: to act or delay, to confront or avoid, to endure or escape. These moments shape years. Pain now does not promise comfort. It promises growth. Regret later promises nothing except reflection without repair. When you consistently choose pain now, regret loses its future. And when regret has no future, freedom finally has space to exist. Chapter 11. Becoming ruthlessly honest with yourself. Becoming ruthlessly honest with yourself is one of the most uncomfortable decisions you will ever make, because honesty removes every place where ego hides. It strips away the stories you tell to protect your image and replaces them with truth you can no longer ignore. Most people avoid this level of honesty because it threatens their comfort, not their character. But comfort built on self-deception eventually collapses. Ruthless honesty does not mean self-hatred. It means clarity. It means seeing yourself as you are, not as you wish you were, and taking responsibility for the gap. That gap is where growth lives. Until you acknowledge it, nothing changes. Honesty is the beginning of discipline, the foundation of self-respect, and the doorway to transformation. Self-deception thrives in vagueness. You tell yourself you are trying, planning, or working on it, without ever defining what effort actually looks like. Ruthless honesty forces definition. It asks hard questions. Did I act today, or did I avoid? Did I commit, or did I delay? These questions feel sharp because they cut through illusion, but they also restore power. When you are honest, you stop negotiating with weakness. You stop pretending that intention equals effort. And once intention and effort are separated clearly, progress becomes measurable instead of imagined. Being honest with yourself requires confronting patterns, not isolated moments. Anyone can justify a bad day. Ruthless honesty looks at weeks, months, and years. It notices repetition. It notices how often excuses appear, how frequently avoidance wins, how consistently comfort is chosen over growth. This level of awareness is painful, but it is necessary. Patterns reveal identity, and identity determines destiny. You cannot change what you refuse to see, and you cannot grow beyond what you continue to excuse. Ruthless honesty also dismantles false narratives. You may believe you lack motivation, time, or opportunity, but honesty often reveals a simpler truth. You avoid discomfort. This realization is humbling, but it is also liberating. If discomfort is the problem, then courage is the solution. You stop searching for external fixes and start building internal strength. This shift removes confusion. You know exactly what needs to change, even if changing it feels difficult. Honesty exposes misalignment between values and behavior. You may value growth, but live casually. You may value discipline, but act inconsistently. This misalignment creates inner tension that manifests as anxiety, dissatisfaction, and restlessness. Ruthless honesty brings that tension into the open. It forces you to choose. Change your values or change your behavior. And once that choice is made, peace becomes possible. Being honest with yourself also means accepting your role in your current circumstances. This does not mean blaming yourself for everything. It means owning what you controlled and acknowledging what you avoided. Ownership restores agency. Without it, you remain reactive. With it, you become intentional. Intentional living begins with honest assessment. Ruthless honesty challenges your self-image. You may see yourself as disciplined, focused, or committed, but honesty tests these beliefs against evidence. This can feel threatening, but it is essential. Identity based on illusion collapses under pressure. Identity built on truth strengthens under challenge. Honesty ensures your foundation is real. Honesty also clarifies priorities. When you stop lying to yourself, you see where your time truly goes. You see what you consistently choose, and those choices reveal what you actually value. This clarity allows correction. You stop drifting and start directing. Ruthless honesty is uncomfortable because it removes emotional padding. You feel exposed. But exposure is how healing begins. You cannot repair what you keep hidden. Honesty opens the door to discipline, structure, and growth. As honesty deepens, excuses lose credibility. They sound hollow. You no longer believe them. This is progress. It means awareness has sharpened. Honesty also builds self-respect. You stop betraying yourself quietly. You become someone who faces truth rather than hides from it. That integrity becomes strength. Ruthless honesty does not weaken you. It grounds you. It removes confusion and replaces it with direction. When you are honest, you know exactly what needs to be done, and clarity creates momentum. Growth accelerates when illusion disappears. And the moment you stop lying to yourself is the moment your life finally becomes changeable. Ruthless honesty also requires you to confront the difference between effort and appearance. Many people work hard to look like they are improving while avoiding the work that would actually change them. You may curate discipline in public while excusing inconsistency in private. Honesty removes this split. It asks whether your unseen actions match your spoken goals. When the answer is no, discomfort arises. But that discomfort is constructive. It exposes where change must happen. You stop performing growth and start practicing it. This shift restores integrity, and integrity stabilizes your inner world. Once you stop acting for approval and start acting for alignment, progress becomes quieter but far more real. Being honest with yourself also means admitting when something is no longer working. You may cling to routines, strategies, or identities that once helped you, but now limit you. Honesty recognizes expiration. It allows you to release what no longer serves your evolution. Holding on out of pride delays growth. Letting go out of truth accelerates it. This willingness to update yourself is a sign of maturity, not failure. Growth requires flexibility. Honesty gives you permission to change direction without shame. Ruthless honesty dismantles false optimism. Instead of telling yourself everything will work out without change, you acknowledge what is required. Hope becomes grounded in action rather than fantasy. This form of hope is durable. It does not collapse under pressure because it is supported by effort. Honesty replaces wishful thinking with realistic confidence. You stop relying on chance and start relying on consistency. Honesty also exposes how often you avoid boredom. Boredom is not emptiness, it is unused capacity. Many people escape boredom through distraction instead of channeling it into creation. Ruthless honesty reveals how much time is lost not to obligation but to avoidance. When you see this clearly, priorities shift. You begin protecting your attention with discipline. Attention is life's most valuable resource, and honesty teaches you where you have been leaking it. Being honest with yourself also changes how you handle failure. Instead of denying it or dramatizing it, you study it. You ask what went wrong without turning it into self-attack. This balanced honesty creates learning instead of shame. Shame paralyzes. Learning empowers. When failure becomes information, growth accelerates. Ruthless honesty demands that you stop outsourcing blame. You recognize where you chose convenience, where you avoided responsibility, where you compromised standards. This ownership is not heavy when embraced. It is freeing. You realize that if your choices created your current position, new choices can create a new one. Power returns the moment blame leaves. Honesty also sharpens discipline. You stop telling yourself you will try and start deciding what you will do. Language matters. Words shape behavior. Honest language is precise. It removes loopholes. Precision eliminates self-deception. When there are no loopholes, action becomes inevitable. Being honest with yourself requires patience. You cannot rebuild overnight. Honesty does not demand instant perfection. It demands consistent truth. Progress becomes steady rather than dramatic. Steady progress lasts. Dramatic change often collapses. Ruthless honesty also changes how you experience solitude. Alone time becomes reflective instead of distracting. You no longer need constant noise to avoid your thoughts. You face them calmly. This inner quiet strengthens clarity and emotional resilience. Honesty reveals that many limits you believed were permanent were simply untested. You discover that fear exaggerated difficulty. Effort was avoided, not impossible. This realization is empowering. You stop underestimating yourself. As honesty deepens, your standards rise naturally. You stop tolerating behaviors that contradict your goals. This is not harshness, it is respect. Respect for your time, respect for your future. Ruthless honesty also eliminates inner conflict. When actions align with values, peace follows. Not comfort, but stability. Stability becomes your foundation. You stop lying, and life stops confusing you. Truth simplifies everything, and once truth becomes your habit, growth has no obstacle left to hide behind. Chapter 12. Build a life with no place for excuses. Building a life with no place for excuses begins with structure, not motivation. Motivation rises and falls, but structure holds when emotions disappear. When your life is built on clear routines, standards, and non-negotiables, excuses lose oxygen. They cannot survive in an environment where actions are decided in advance. Structure removes daily debate. You no longer ask whether you feel like doing what matters. You do it because it is part of who you are. This is how excuses are starved, not through willpower, but through design. A disciplined structure turns effort into habit, and habit into identity. Once identity is solid, excuses no longer feel natural. They feel foreign. A life without excuses requires ownership at every level. You stop blaming time, energy, mood, or circumstances. Ownership does not mean everything is your fault. It means everything you can influence is your responsibility. This shift is powerful. It restores agency. When you own your outcomes, you stop waiting for permission to act. You stop negotiating with weakness. Responsibility becomes your default setting, and excuses lose their relevance. Building this life also means simplifying decisions. Excuses thrive in complexity. Too many options, too many plans, too many maybe later paths. Clarity kills excuses. When your priorities are clear, distractions lose power. You know what matters. You know what comes first. Everything else becomes secondary. Simplicity creates focus. Focus creates consistency. Consistency destroys excuses. A life with no place for excuses demands honest standards. You define what is acceptable and what is not. You stop lowering expectations to avoid discomfort. Standards act as boundaries. They protect your progress from emotional compromise. When standards are firm, excuses feel like violations rather than relief. This internal shift changes behavior permanently. Excuses also disappear when your environment supports discipline. You design your surroundings to make the right actions easier and the wrong ones harder. You remove triggers that encourage delay. You create cues that encourage effort. Environment shapes behavior more than intention ever will. When your environment aligns with your goals, excuses struggle to survive. Building this life also means respecting time deeply. You stop treating time as endless. You understand its value. This awareness creates urgency without panic. You act because time matters, not because fear controls you. Urgency rooted in respect leads to steady progress. Excuses rely on the illusion of later. Respect for time destroys that illusion. A no-excuse life also requires emotional discipline. You allow emotions to exist without letting them decide. You act when tired. You move when uncertain. You continue when enthusiasm fades. This emotional independence is strength. It prevents excuses from using feelings as leverage. You feel everything, but you do not obey everything. Consistency becomes your greatest weapon. You stop seeking intensity and start building rhythm. Small actions done daily eliminate the need for excuses. There is no pressure to be heroic. There is only commitment to show up. Over time, this rhythm builds momentum. Momentum makes excuses unnecessary. A life without excuses also values recovery correctly. Rest is intentional, not avoidant. You rest to restore capacity, not to escape responsibility. This distinction matters. Proper recovery strengthens discipline instead of weakening it. Excuses often hide behind false rest. Intentional recovery removes that hiding place. You also learn to finish what you start. Completion builds credibility with yourself. Each finished task strengthens self-trust. Excuses lose power when self-trust is high. You know you will follow through. There is no need to justify delay. Building this life requires patience. You are not eliminating excuses overnight. You are replacing them with systems, habits, and identity. Progress compounds quietly. The absence of excuses becomes normal. Eventually, excuses feel incompatible with who you are. They no longer tempt you. They no longer comfort you. They feel beneath your standards. You stop fighting excuses because there is no room for them to live. Your life becomes structured, intentional, and aligned. And when there is no place for excuses, growth has no choice but to happen. Building a life with no place for excuses also means redesigning how you make decisions under pressure. Pressure exposes habits. When stress rises, excuses look for entry points. A no-excuse life prepares for pressure in advance. You decide ahead of time how you will act when tired, busy, or uncertain. This pre-decision removes emotional bargaining. You do not wait to see how you feel. You already know what you will do. This is how consistency survives difficult days. Pressure no longer dictates behavior. Preparation does. Life becomes predictable in the best way. You respond with discipline instead of reaction, and excuses find no cracks to enter. Such a life also requires clarity about trade-offs. Every choice costs something. Growth costs comfort. Progress costs convenience. A no-excuse life stops pretending otherwise. You accept the cost consciously instead of resisting it emotionally. When costs are acknowledged up front, excuses lose their persuasive power. You are no longer surprised by effort. You expected it. This acceptance transforms struggle into agreement. You are not suffering, you are investing. That mental shift changes endurance. You last longer because you are no longer arguing with reality. Building this life means mastering transitions. Excuses often appear between activities after work, before starting, during downtime. These gaps are dangerous because intention weakens there. A no-excuse life creates rituals for transitions, clear beginnings, clear endings, clear cues to act. When transitions are intentional, momentum is protected. You move smoothly from one responsibility to the next without hesitation. Excuses thrive in uncertainty. Ritual removes uncertainty. A life without excuses also requires truth-based planning. You plan according to how you actually behave, not how you wish you behaved. You stop overestimating motivation and underestimating friction. Plans become realistic. Realistic plans are followed. Unrealistic plans breed excuses. Honesty in planning is discipline in disguise. It builds systems that work even on low-energy days. When plans fit reality, excuses have no argument left. Such a life also limits decision volume. Too many decisions exhaust willpower and invite excuses. You automate what you can. You standardize routines. You reduce daily choices. This conservation of mental energy preserves discipline for what matters most. A no-excuse life is not rigid. It is efficient. Efficiency protects consistency. Consistency eliminates excuses. Another requirement is consequence awareness. You connect actions to outcomes clearly. When you skip effort, you acknowledge the cost immediately. When you act, you acknowledge the benefit. This feedback loop keeps you honest. Excuses rely on disconnection, the belief that today's choices do not affect tomorrow. Clear consequence awareness breaks that illusion and anchors responsibility in reality. A no-excuse life also respects recovery boundaries. You stop blurring rest and avoidance. Rest is scheduled and purposeful. Avoidance is identified and corrected. This clarity preserves energy without eroding discipline. You rest to sustain effort, not to escape it. Excuses lose their favorite disguise when rest has a clear purpose. Building this life requires patience with imperfection. You do not wait to eliminate excuses completely before acting. You act while correcting. You progress while refining. Perfectionism creates delay. A no-excuse life prioritizes continuity over flawlessness. Continuity builds trust. Trust sustains action. You also learn to say no decisively. Overcommitment breeds excuses. When your schedule is overloaded, discipline collapses. A no-excuse life protects capacity by choosing commitments carefully. Fewer promises, kept consistently, outperform many promises broken regularly. Capacity management is respect for your limits, not surrender to them. Such a life also redefines accountability. You stop using external pressure as your primary motivator. Accountability becomes internal. You hold yourself to standards even when no one is watching. This independence is powerful. Excuses rely on invisibility. Internal accountability removes it. A no-excuse life values finishing over starting. Completion becomes a habit. Each finished task reinforces self-trust. Self-trust makes excuses unnecessary. You no longer need to justify delay because follow-through is expected. Over time, identity changes. You stop thinking in terms of willpower and start thinking in terms of alignment. Actions match values. Values guide decisions. Decisions shape outcomes. Excuses feel incompatible with this identity. They no longer offer relief. They feel dishonest. Life becomes simpler, not easier, clearer. And when clarity governs your days, excuses have nowhere left to hide. In the end, the most dangerous enemy you will ever face is not outside of you. It is the voice inside your head that keeps giving you permission to stay the same. Excuses don't shout, they whisper. They convince you that waiting is wise, that comfort is harmless, and that there will always be time later. And slowly, without drama, they drain your life of momentum and meaning. The moment you become honest with yourself, everything changes. When you stop defending your excuses, you reclaim your power. You realize that discipline is not punishment, it is freedom. It is the force that replaces regret with progress and intention with action. You don't need more motivation. You need fewer lies. The life you want is built the moment you stop negotiating with weakness and start acting from responsibility. So remember this. Excuses may feel safe today, but they cost you everything tomorrow. Choose effort. Choose ownership. Choose the version of yourself that no longer needs excuses to survive.